Hey everyone, welcome back to D Squared Stories, an audio fiction podcast bringing you short serialized weekly stories. We're going to be continuing with the next chapter of Amoretta. So, without any further ado, let's go into a quick recap and then we'll get started. Last time, Ghost and Jasmine became outlaws after taking on some Phosphon guards and foiling Jasmine's erroneous arrest. Ghost planned to turn himself in order to seize the opportunity to steal the medicine from Phosphon headquarters. Jasmine and Ghost arrived at the site and prepared to call the spirits to their aid, but a guard had created some sort of UV amplification device to cause harm to the spirits. The sun went dark for a moment as the spirits grew enraged by this, and Ghost had to carefully work to protect the spirits and guards from one another. Out of nowhere, Ray Fever took a gun to one of his own guards and then shot Ghost in the leg. He only ran off when something about how Jasmine threw herself in front of him caused him to get emotional. Chapter 3. My Brother's Keeper. 34 years before shooting Ghost in the leg, Ray Fever was Raul Fernandez, a young boy fascinated with toy trucks. Playing with his toy trucks in the driveway of his home was the best way he knew to avoid being in the house for one of his parents' arguments. They had become increasingly aggressive as of late, often getting physical. When Raul's brother, Kenny, was not around to comfort him, Raul would take his trucks to the driveway when they would start yelling. Such was the case on a fateful day for the 6-year-old Raul. "Vroom, vroom," he said. "I gotta get this package to the customer. It's a very special delivery." Raul ran his toy truck up to a toy house. "Here you go, sir. Here's your package." "Oh, thank you. I've been waiting for this." "No problem. I'm off to my next delivery." Raul looked around for a bit. "Why don't you try moving him to the next house?" he said, seemingly to no one in particular. Then suddenly, the truck moved itself to Raul's other toy house. Raul giggled with excitement as he played with the spirit. Raul continued mindlessly playing with his toys, living his dream, when 3 boys, about 5 years older than him, pulled up on their bikes. The tallest of the boys, one named Roy Sharp, got off his bike and walked over to him. "Well, looky here. If it isn't Raul and his stupid toy trucks," he said. "Leave me alone, Roy." "Or what? Are you going to tell your daddy on me?" he asked. Raul turned to the window. He could see the silhouettes of his parents, still seemingly yelling at each other. And this time turned around, another one of the kids stomped on his toy house, crumpling the plastic. Raul's eyes immediately started to well up as the kids taunted him. He picked up his toy truck and started running away. He did not get far before something heavy hit his back. Roy had thrown a rock at him, causing him to trip. "Ha! What a loser!" Roy said. "Spirits! Spirits, please help me!" Raul said. "Aw, is someone crying for their little imaginary buddies to help? Let's see if they'll help him." Roy and his friends continued to pelt Raul with rocks. He laid there crying, each one leaving a welt in him. Suddenly, an angry voice called out, "You leave him alone!" Raul's older brother, Kenny, stood in front of Raul, swatting the rocks away as they continued to throw them at him. When they stopped, he stood with his arms outstretched, completely blocking him from any harm. "And what are you going to do to stop us?" Roy asked. Kenny ran over and grabbed one of Roy's friends by the neck and immediately slammed him into the ground. The other boy ran over to him and tried to hit him, but Kenny quickly swung his knee right into the boy's groin, causing him to collapse in pain. Roy ran over and grabbed Kenny by the neck, trying to choke him. Kenny raised his hands over his head, locked them together, and swung down, breaking the hold. And then he flung his fists into Roy's face, knocking him onto the ground. Kenny then got on top of him and started wailing on his face. "Let's see how you like it when someone stronger picks on you," Kenny said, in between a barrage of fists. After a couple of moments, he got off of Roy and turned around to help his brother up. Roy and his friends all rose to their feet, looking worse for wear, especially Roy. Roy glared at him, tears streaming down his face, as Kenny just coldly stared back at him. "I'm gonna kill you, Kenny," he said. "I'm gonna kill you and your brother. Just you wait." The boys got back on their bikes and left. Raul trembled and sobbed at the threat lobbied against them. Kenny reassuringly patted him on the back before bringing him in for a hug. "Hey there, little buddy," he said. "There's nothing to worry about. He'll never hurt you. You'd have to go through me to do that." Raul, still sniffling, said, "Are you sure? Do you promise?" A breeze picked up around them as Raul asked the question. Kenny felt it and smiled as it intensified. "Yeah, little bro. I promise you I'll see to it that Roy never hurts you, no matter what it takes." Wind danced around them as Kenny and Raul marveled at their invisible friends binding their promise. The next couple weeks came and went. It was only when Raul was walking home from school that he came across a scene in his neighborhood. There was police tape and a body, obscured by some attempt to burn it in the middle. It was being loaded up into a bag. Raul ran over in a hurry, but was stopped by the old sheriff. "Whoa there, buddy," he said. "You're Raul Fernandez, right? I can't let you go any further." "Yeah, I am. What happened here?" "Can you come sit down with me for a moment, son?" The sheriff brought Raul over to a curb to sit him down. He let out a deep sigh. "I'm sorry to tell you this, but we found your mom passed out drunk and your dad nowhere to be found, so I'm not sure if there's anyone better to do it," he said. "Your brother, Kenny, he's dead." Raul started shaking uncontrollably. That can't be. How?" "It seems someone bludgeoned him to death with a shovel," he said. "Some neighbors say they saw Roy Sharp leaving the scene with a bloody shovel, but now he's nowhere to be found." But no," Raul cried. "My brother was supposed to protect me from him. The spirits were supposed to help him." "Son, one way or another, he did," he said. "Either Roy is gone for good, or the second he gets back, he's going in cuffs to be tried as an adult." Raul sat there crying. The sheriff patted him on the back and then returned to the crime scene. He then saw a truck pull up. James Sharp, Roy's father, exited the vehicle. Raul remembered him walking over cautiously to the sheriff. Then he remembered seeing the sheriff whisper something into his ear. James looked relieved and then shook the sheriff's hand. Raul did not understand fully what was happening at this time, but even still, something about it made his stomach turn. Back in current day, in Ray's office, he slammed back a glass of whiskey furiously as he paced around his office. "That outsider. He makes promises with the spirits. He knows my name. None of this should be possible," he said. He marched over to his table to pour himself another glass, but an invisible spirit lifted the bottle out of his reach. "Oh, come on, you bastards," he yelled. "My promise was to not let anything get in the way of what I want, and that's what I want right now." The spirits put the bottle back down on the table, and he poured himself another drink. "Is it that easy to get you to see things a certain way?" he asked. "Is that what Roy Sharp did when you should have protected my brother? Did he point out that Kenny said he'd never protect both of us, and that's why you let him beat my brother to death with a shovel?" Ray gulped down his second pour of whiskey. His face twitched with agitation. "And to think, given all the resources at my disposal now, that I still never found him. There was no trace of him anywhere after that. With any luck, someone dented his head in. But I can't help but think... No." Ray shook his head. He sat down at his desk. "I have to focus. This incident's going to make its way back to HQ at any moment. I'll need an explanation." Jasmine carried Ghost's body into her mom's house and laid him down on the couch. She quickly did her best to disinfect and patch up the wound. Ghost grunted in pain throughout the whole process. After a bit, though, she managed to get the situation under control. She wiped some sweat from her brow. "Whew, good Lord, you're heavy," she said. "My mom must have gone out for groceries." "Damn, hadn't anticipated he made a deal with the spirits," Ghost said. "Hush now, just rest. Here, let me take this hat off you," she said. She put on the hat for a bit, posing with her fingers in a gun shape. "I think it looks pretty good on me. Mind if I keep it?" she asked. Ghost grunted a bit in pain. "Go right ahead." Jasmine pouted. "That's no fun. I'm trying to tease you to get your mind off the pain." Mrs. Johnson returned to her home and let out a gasp as she walked in the front door. "Oh, my heavens," she said. "What done happened to you?" "He got shot, Ma. What do you think? Can you take care of him while I go get some medicine?" Without waiting to hear an answer, Jasmine burst out the door and ran off. Mrs. Johnson went over to check on Ghost's wound. She put a cold towel on his head and put the kettle on to heat some tea. As she went into the kitchen, Ghost groaned as he tried to stand up. She ran over and pushed him back down. "What in the blazes do you think you're doing?" she asked. "It's not safe for me to be here. You and Jasmine could get in trouble." "Jazz is always in trouble, whether she deserves it or not. And honestly, it's pretty 50-50. Ghost let out a chuckle before groaning again. "Tell me, Miss Johnson, why do you stay here? What part of this town that scorned you makes you love it so much?" "Love it?" she asked. I suppose Jazz could get that idea from my insistence. No, quite frankly, I can't stay in this town anymore." "You can't?" "Nah, never really loved it much, honestly. So little to do, so few people. As a girl, I always dreamed of moving to the big city and starting a new life there. Some days I wish Jazz would just fulfill my dream for me, as much as I'd miss her." "I reckon I don't understand then. Why are you here?" "You might already know this, but Jasmine's father, he was a traveling man, moving one place to another, selling things, doing odd jobs. For most, it wouldn't be so lucrative. But man, this man was charming as all get out. He won me over in his first conversation with me, and I'm not an easy lady to please." Ghost looked on as she continued. "He told me he was working towards a fortune and couldn't stay long, but in only a few more stops he'd have everything he needed to settle down with me, wherever I wanted to. I, of course, was no idiot love-struck teenager, so you know what I did?" Ghost smiled. "I think I do, but I'd like to hear you tell it." "I made him promise. He promised he would come back, maybe not right away, but as soon as the time was right. He would meet me back here in this very town, and I'll be damned if I leave this place and miss that chance." "You do realize, though," he said, "something out of his control could have happened, or the wording, when it's the right time. That lends a lot of ambiguity. He may never come back." "That very well might be, but there's a force at play even stronger than the spirit's Ghost. That's the power of love. I love that man with all my heart, and I know he loves me. Love so strong nothing can ever tear it apart." Ghost went silent. His smile vanished. He started to bite his lip as his face filled with concern. He groaned as he tried to get back up. Mrs. Johnson, startled by his sudden movement, went to try and push him back down as he rebuffed her. "What in tarnation are you doing this for?" she asked. "You're wrong, Mrs. Johnson," he said. "Some people are filled with such an intense malice that even the strongest of bonds can be broken by it. Trust me, I used to be such a man. Give my regards to Jasmine. Tell her I'll handle the rest." He staggered out the door and made his way down the street. He clung to the shadows of the buildings as he limped his way across Amoretta. Ray Fever stared down the receiver in his conference center with a fake smile and hollow eyes as he took the latest berating from another member of the corporate staff. As they prattled on about the disruption in the yard that caused several shipments out of the center to get delayed and go missing, his mind seemed to be occupied with something else. "Fever, do you understand me?" the booming voice said. "Yes, sir. Yes, I do," he lied. "One more slip-up like that? No. As a matter of fact, even the slightest grumbling and you're out of there and out of a job," he said. "And for heaven's sake, son, quash that backwater superstition out of your staff at once. Our HR team is sick of fielding these nonsense complaints." "Yes, sir. Understood." The call hung up. The spirits immediately went about moving things in his conference center as usual. Ray let out a sigh. The slight buzz he had picked up from throwing back his whiskey was the only thing that kept him mellow enough to not curse out his moronic bosses. "KPI's this, performance evaluation's that," he said. "If these morons spent half an hour not in a conference room and anywhere that actual work happens, they'd see how difficult doing this all actually is." A voice laughed from the doorway. "Ha! I like this side of you more, Ray." Jasmine stood in the doorway with Ghost's hat leaning tilted on her head. She smiled confidently, without any apparent concern for her safety. "How the hell did you get in here?" he asked. He reached for his gun at his waist. "There's no bullets in that," she said. Ray noticed the magazine had been taken out of his handgun. He watched as it floated in front of Jasmine, the spirits carrying it around like a toy. "And as for getting in here, I took a page from your book and made a promise to myself that I'd be able to sneak in undetected. Though I have to admit, it feels a little cheap. A promise should be something you make selflessly, to another person. Don't you agree, Raoul?" His brow furrowed with anger. "How do you people know that name?" "A little clipping from the local paper about 20 years ago." She held out a newspaper, pulled from Ghost's jacket. The headline read, "Amoretta Local lands big job at Phosphon Corp." It went on. "Raul Fernandez, now known as Ray at his company, has become head of digital media at the gigantic corporate conglomerate known as Phosphon Corp. Raul, a once local of the little town of Amoretta, left his mom's house at only age 16, 10 years after the unresolved murder of his brother, Kenny Fernandez. The suspected killer, Roy Sharp, has been missing since the incident." "How is that possible?" Ray asked. "I had that publication bought out, and before I laid off all their staff, I had them destroy all their physical duplicates of the stories." Jasmine winced. "Wow, you really are a jackass. I guess you missed one." "If I had to guess, the library still had their physical archive intact somewhere in the rubble there." Ray looked confused. "You don't know? That means you didn't find it." "Focus up, Buttercup. Based on that conversation, I'd say you're on thin ice with your bosses, and I reckon they're too stupid to have clocked the fact that you have a personal connection with this town. But if they did, that might break the ice." "You wouldn't dare." "I'd like not to, Raoul. I really would. That's why I think we should make a deal. Or rather, let's call it a promise. The spirits in the room stopped playing with the objects that they were carrying and pushing, and immediately caused a vortex of wind to circle in the conference room. Loose papers went flying around. Jasmine smiled confidently while Ray looked to be gritting his teeth in anger. If you think blackmailing me will do you any good, just wait until the brown-nosing, over-promising jackass they send in after me. You'll be wishing I was still around, he said. Oh, I know that much, she said. My ask is quite simple. Just a few months' worth of those desert lung pills you have stashed in your safe. As someone who suffers from it yourself, I reckon you're aware of how early use can drastically change its outcome in children. Ray stared at her and then started laughing. You and him are too much. All this for some girl? He asked. It's also super ironic given her parents. Arnold's a great man. You shut your trap. He and Wallace are the only stand-ups left here. Yeah, great man who can't make it through his shift with that back of his, he said. Fortunately, his wife Kelsey sees the bigger picture and supplements that income by being a paid snitch for me. Gives me the scoop on the town I can't get. Jasmine rolled her eyes. I don't frankly care what a mother has to do to take care of her family. Well, she does a little more than that. In fact, she was the one who put the idea in my head to arrest you. She said if Phosphon finally put you behind bars like the sheriff was too skittish to do without evidence, then the townsfolk might actually like us more. That's gotta sting, doesn't it? Knowing that people think your very removal would put everyone in a good mood. Jasmine glared at him, failing to hide the expression on her face showing how much this knowledge hurt her. She was unable to bring herself to believe that Ray could just be lying because deep down, she knew the spirit of what he said was true. Listen, don't get worked up about it, Ray said. These people are morons, Miss Johnson. You, on the other hand, are a bright young lady who infiltrated an office of the world's biggest company and has humiliating evidence against its regional director. You're smart. And since you're smart, I'd like to make a deal any smart person would take. Jasmine stayed silent. You hand over that little rag of text, and I'll give you enough money to get moved and settled comfortably anywhere in the country. Enough for you and your mom. How could you say no to that? Kiss this little town goodbye and live life somewhere where you can be actually appreciated. Jasmine looked down. She slightly crumpled the paper in her hand. Ray looked on with a malicious grin that only a cutthroat corporate middle manager could give. Jasmine put her hands on her hips and let out a big sigh. Sorry, never said this was up for negotiation, she said. It's the paper for the medicine. Take it or leave it. Ray's jaw dropped in surprise. What do you mean? Did you not hear my counteroffer? How could you trade all that for a little girl whose mother would trade you for silver pieces? I reckon I just don't hold that against the kid. Someone told me I should go against the grain and be kind when others are awful, and that's my outlaw attitude. Ray slammed his fist against the table. He looked frustrated and then enraged, borderline on the verge of tears. His whole body seemed to shake as he processed what she had to say. I just don't get it, he said. I was a kid down on my luck once. No one ever went out of their way to help Raul Fernandez. No one was there to stick up for me when my deadbeat dad left me, or tell my alcoholic mother to quit it for me. The only one who ever stood up for me was my brother, and all he got for it was a shovel to the head. Jasmine stood there in silence as he had his outburst. There was no one who intervened on my behalf. I had to do it all myself. I had to pull myself up by my bootstraps and make it in this harsh world. And you expect me to just go along with this pity party for her? I guess that's the difference between you and me, she said. I grew up with no one but my ma on my side. You just said folks around here were actively rooting for me to be in jail. I won't force that kind of pain on anyone else, though. Enough chatting. You promise or not? She stuck out her pinky as she stepped closer to him. The gale of spirit winds continued to surge around them. Ray reluctantly stretched out his hand and locked his pinky with hers. The gust surged, and Jasmine had to hold on to her hat to keep it from flying off her head. After the quick surge died down, she handed him the newspaper clipping, and he unlocked his safe, handing over handfuls of boxes of pills to her. She nodded and started to make her way out. For what it's worth, she said, I think Raul Fernandez is a much nicer name than Ray Fever. She started to step out the door. Wait. She turned around to see Ray in another frantic state. She looked on with curiosity, not quite understanding what he was fussing about this time. Yeah? What is it? This newspaper, he said, clutching it carefully in his hand. You made it sound like you weren't the one to find it. Maybe. Maybe I did. What's it to you? It was that stranger named Ghost, wasn't it? He asked. He found the newspaper. He knew exactly where to look for it, too. Jasmine, undeterred by his questions, continued walking out the door, slowly leaving him behind in his office. Ray remained in the conference room, his hand on the table, his entire body still shaking, but his face was twisted into an uncomfortably wide smile. He started laughing. He started laughing uncontrollably. He burst out of the room and into the hallway. Jasmine jumped, turning around to see him. "Jasmine," he said, "you tell Roy Sharp that he's a dead man, and I'm going to make him pay for what he did to my brother." Thank you so much for listening to this chapter of Amoretta. If you enjoyed, please rate the podcast on the app, give it a like on YouTube, and share with anyone who you think might also enjoy. Amoretta is a D Squared Stories production. You can stay up to date with Amoretta and all future D Squared Stories productions by finding us on social media. That'll be D Squared Stories across just about any of the big platforms. I appreciate you listening and hope to have you listen again next week.